Hello, and welcome to the Argyle AI Decision Maker Summit, revolutionizing business strategy with AI. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. Throughout today's event, you will also have the chance to win one of several prizes. So be sure to check out the prizes and raffle rules tab of the interface to see how you can earn points. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our moderator, Tolgay Kizilelma, Director of MS in Cybersecurity Program, Dominican University of California. We're super excited to have Tolgay and our panelists for a panel discussion titled Battening the AI Hatches, Sensible Approaches for More Secure AI. Welcome, Tolgay. Over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Very excited to be part of this session. Really, we have two great distinguished guest speakers. So let's go ahead and start. Raj, why don't we start with you? Could you please introduce yourself quickly? Thank you.
Thank you, Tolgay. Hi, everybody. This is Raj Badwar. I have been in the security world for a very long time, about like 29, 30 years. Currently, I am the global CISO at Jacobs Engineering. And before that, I've had security leadership roles at other corporations like Oracle, AIG, Voya, BAE Systems, and Bank of America. So, and apart from my 9 to 5, I'm active in the security research scene. I've written 4 books. I have a couple of security patents, and I'm very happy and thrilled to be here.
Great. Thank you, Raj. Ravi?
Thanks. I'm very excited to be here. Ravi Starzl. I am a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University in the Language Technologies Institute. I am also a faculty member at the Center for National Security Initiatives at the University of Colorado and an affiliate professor at West Point. My primary emphasis is work of applied artificial intelligence to the domain of cyber operations, particularly in the realm of radio frequency and operational technologies as well, and particularly looking at AI both as a tool for security and cyber operations, and also AI as a target of security and cyber operations.
Great. Well, again, we have very limited time, so much to talk. So let's go dive deep into it. So Raj, let's start with you. What are the greatest security risks related to generative AI? And again, there's AI and then Gen AI. Thank you.
Thanks, Tolgay. I think that, Gen AI has unleashed a lot of capabilities onto our business, right? Into the IT side of the business, into the product side of business, right? And there are lots of productivity gains that can be had from it, right? So we are not going to talk about that today, right? That's another session. But it does also bring certain significant risks, to bear. So one, big risks that I have seen in the industry is the risk of oversharing of data. So for example, if your data, that is resident in your Microsoft tenant, like in your SharePoint or in your OneDrive or in your Teams channels or other places, and if that access is open, then for example, the Gen AI capabilities like the chat GPTs of the world or the co-pilots of the world do have the probable capability of actually reading that data, indexing that data, and responding to a question that somebody may ask. And so if there was sensitive confidential data sitting in these environments, it could actually get leaked or exposed, right? So that's what is basically becomes oversharing of data. So that is a significant risk that we all have to solve that problem. Many of us who have Gen AI in production are solving this problem with various techniques, right? So that's one risk. The other risk is, unauthorized access to sensitive data, for example, data that is controlled, sensitive. There's a probability that there's a potential for unauthorized access to it in the same construct as oversharing of data. The other thing is, a lot of the data, like Gen AI is not creating new content, right? It's taking existing content that it has learned through its various training data sets and giving a sophisticated answer, right? So the problem is that if the source of the data that it learned from was, somebody belonged to somebody else, then the response that you may have may cause an intellectual property violation, an IP violation, right? So if you use that in response to a proposal to a customer, and you use images or content that belong to somebody else that was given to you by Gen AI model or an engine, now you may be liable for any kind of a damages from an IP violation suit. So I think those are some of the concerns. There's a lot here, but I'm not going to go too much into it. The other thing is that Gen AI can make it easier for script kiddies or other threat actors to generate malware, right? So and then launch it. So you don't really need to have expertise in creating malware. You could actually have it create you malicious scripts because it could have learned that from its training data sets, right? If it got trained on it. One other thing that I've observed is, like that if you ask the Gen AI a question, and if let's say it doesn't know the answer, it may still give you a response that is completely bogus. It's called hallucinations. It will hallucinate a response, right? And that could be very dangerous and troublesome because there is no way at the moment, a good foolproof way for every response that comes out of Gen AI to be verified, right? It's very difficult for us to verify that. So otherwise you have to get another Gen AI engine to verify the responses given by the previous Gen AI engine, right? So all these are concerns that are happening. And the last thing I'll say on this is that, like it has been used for impersonation or impersonation attacks. So Gen AI can create very sophisticated phishing emails. It has been launched to actually, in collaboration, a combination with deepfakes to generate impersonation attacks. And there has been lots of serious incidents that have occurred in that area. So I think that fantastic technology, lots of opportunities for productivity improvements and gains across the board. And we'll talk some about later in this session. But also it does bring forth some serious risks that we have to know about. And we have to implement the mitigating controls or the remediating controls to actually deal with them so that, this does not become a big problem for us.
Great.
Back to you.
Well, thank you, Raj. Really appreciate it. And again, back to the points you mentioned, we've seen examples of lawsuits about the IP without naming the vendors. And a major company, they had their code repositories breached through it's an access issue. But anyway, they're all out there. Ravi, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the greatest security risks related to generative AI is a very broad question. So I'll try to maybe package it in the particular way that I think about the problem, because the field is moving so quickly and the underlying technologies are evolving so rapidly. What's capable with it is also evolving rapidly. So maybe I'll reframe the question more in terms of what I think are non-perishable elements of AI that are applicable to cyber operations or cybersecurity risks. And one of those things in particular that stands out as almost an existential change in how we should think about the world is complexity management. Artificial intelligence / generative AI / large-scale machine learning is capable of astonishing levels of data discovery and collation. And so what this means is it's become the ultimate tool for asymmetric operations. A single person with adequate skill and motivation could play cat and mouse with an entire country under current circumstances in a variety of different ways, from information operations all the way to actual offensive cyber operations. And that bears a lot of contemplation. I also, by the way, just telegraphing my position, don't think the correct thing to do is to overregulate AI. I think the best way to handle these risks is to provide more open access and provide a more open playing field so that the natural level at which all actors are acting tends to level out and balance out without creating concentrations of the potential for abuses of power. Now, along those lines, I could just give a concrete example. I mean, imagine, if you will, that there's a threat actor out there who has access through some kind of dialogue interface, very much like what you might see in any of the chat interfaces, where they're able to essentially concentrate all of the information about any particular system's vulnerabilities into a real-time stream of events, active kill chain planning, active threat, active persistence, in combination with something simple like a packet sniffer or an Nmap scan. you could easily identify the particular versioning of every gateway in a network, identify all of the common vulnerabilities and exploits associated with those gateways, identify all of the locations to which that gateway reports from an administrative perspective, and target essentially all of the known vulnerabilities at once, including spear phishing attacks. So the way that we have thought about cybersecurity in the past has relied a lot on security through obscurity. And I just don't think that's going to be a realistic way forward in the future under these circumstances. That all of the information about all vulnerabilities will be available all the time now through these systems. And of course, the cloud providers are trying to put guardrails around these kinds of activities. But the cat is already out of the bag. Open source models are equivalent, effectively, if you know how to use them in terms of their capabilities and performance in this domain. So I think the greatest risk is that we cannot rely on security through obscurity anymore. We're going to have to come up with active, forward-leaning plans for how to address both intrinsic network level security, human level security through phishing, and then more meta level information operations security, protecting your brand, protecting your reputation, and protecting your network of people from incorrect or smear campaigns or whatever might be the case in terms of what a bad actor in information operations might want to do.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. Again, regarding security risk, I guess as long as humans are in the loop, right, we have certain control in terms of decision making. But well, I think it's going to take some while, us time to get there. But if once we're out of the loop, I think that's when AI, I think, making the decisions, and humans don't have any say in this. So that's, I think, how we can look at it as well. Great. So next question is, what are the most significant ways you have seen organizations improve how they secure AI systems? Raj?
Right. I mean, I can talk with a bit of confidence about some of the CISO circle that I have, right, in the insurance, banking, and defense sector, right, of some of the steps that we have been taking to secure some of the common implementations of GenAI, like the co-pilots of the world or the ChatGPT enterprises of the world or otherwise, right? So there are some best practices that we are following. One thing is that, we're making sure that any input of data or output of data from a GenAI, like, for example, a large language model that is behind the scene with a chat interface. So any of that data does not become public data, especially when it's used for commercial purposes, for a given corporation, right? So making sure that the model is actually not using that to train itself. It's actually, it has an asynchronous training module or training mechanisms of where it actually acquires training data sets from. But it shouldn't be the data that is used by a corporation or a commercial entity, right? So I think that is something that we are trying to do, is by basically opting out of becoming a training data set mechanism while we are interacting with the model, right? So that's one step that we have taken and recommended that we do. The other thing that we have, obviously recommended and are doing is that we use dedicated instances of the LLM, the large language models, right? So for example, if you are in the Microsoft ecosystem, making sure that the OpenAI engine that is running, right, that basically, you can have an API level integration with or a chat interface with, is dedicated to your tenant, right? So that it's not shared, so that anything that it may learn, or any input or output of data, whether it's chat, whether it's text, chat, video, or otherwise, images or otherwise, stays in the tenant and does not leak out, right? You don't want your data to leak out to your competitor, for example, or to a third actor, right? So I think those are some of the things that we have been doing. The other thing is, making sure that any data that may be either being input or is again coming out as an output is obfuscated if it has sensitive data. For example, if you asked it a question, hey, give me all the social security numbers of all the employees, and it had access, just like Ravi was saying, into a data set where it had correlated or figured that data out and responded, well, even if it did do that and if you hadn't closed the access, we should be able to obfuscate or block sensitive data coming out as an output if possible. So a data sanitization layer. Because the way these models work is that it's not just you directly interface with the learning model, right? You directly don't go to the LLM. You go through an intermediate layer, and the intermediate layer actually figures out what prompt needs to go to the large language model, right? And obviously, most of the providers, whether it's whether it's OpenAI, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Google or otherwise, they make these claims that the prompts are not stored. Although that is not entirely true. Prompts can be stored, right? But having said that, the other thing is, like some of the practical use cases is that if you are generating source code from a LLM model, from ChatGPT or otherwise, or whichever, OpenAI, Copilot or otherwise, making sure that all source code that is generated that is going to be used is scanned for malware, is scanned for obviously any kind of deficiencies like static analysis, dynamic analysis, and also scan for any potential IP violations. Because you don't want to put stuff into production, source that may actually not belong to you. It may have been copied, or part of it, a library may have been from somebody else that the language model may have learned from, right? So scanning for all of that, doing an SCA analysis, software composition analysis, looking for malware in it, making sure that before any of this goes into any kind of production environment, it's properly scanned, right? And appropriate actions taken. Also, any open source code that may have been modified by the model, right? If you do know that it's open source, you have to make sure that you disclose that and you return the open source back to the open source community. Otherwise, you'll be in violation of your open source license, right? So I think those are some of the things that we are doing. Specifically speaking, also, if you're operating in different parts of the world, we have different privacy or compliance requirements, like, like, for example, GDPR or any geographic data boundary requirements. And if you ask, for example, Copilot a question and the data that it's returning to is of German citizens or Saudi Arabian citizens or American citizens or otherwise, then you have to make sure that any geographic boundaries that you have to maintain for privacy or compliance reasons are not broken. So I think those sanitization layers also have to be added in the middle. And also making sure, just like I said earlier, like the last point I'll make is that, again, you directly don't interact with the large language model, right? There is an intermediate layer. So any data that you may ask or upload to it or questions you may ask for it, that data needs to be segmented and encrypted. And the keys, at the moment, none of them are letting you bring your own keys. OpenAI will not bring your own keys for encryption. But at least that data should be segmented, which is your data, and it needs to be properly encrypted. And you should have line of sight into like how is the keys being managed and where are they being stored and all that stuff, so that that data doesn't get, again, in wrong hands. Unauthorized access does not happen. So that, all these assertions and claims made by the cloud providers is that, oh, well, your data is private. The prompts are not stored. Don't worry about it, right? Your data will not be used to train the model. Some of them may not be entirely true, right? So I recommend take the precautions, understand how a given model is working, where is the data going, where are the prompts being stored, if at all, is your data properly protected or not? Any sensitive, if you're going to break any kind of a PII data boundary, if you're going to have PCI data, making sure they're properly protected, obfuscated. So all of this you should do before you put these things into production and unleash them for your large user base. And there's a lot more here. I'm sure Ravi will cover some of the other aspects as well, but I think this is a good start for everybody. Tolgay, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, thanks for that, Raj. We can talk all day long about this, but anyway, Ravi, what do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, everything Raj said, and in my particular area, I mean, let me say, much of what Raj said would fall under in my taxonomy of the world, risk management, and particularly organizational considerations around the liabilities associated with the use of these kinds of systems, and that is not to be underestimated. It's also complicated because norms and the legalities of this are not yet worked out entirely. So that's a gigantic. I think that it is worth spending time staying abreast of current and working with whatever your particular risk assessment, risk management group is to determine your organization's risk to benefit ratio in terms of these specific use case scenarios. And now, from my particular perspective, I think the way in which AI has been used to make the biggest difference in terms of security, actual securing of systems, I've noticed on two sides. One is AI as a tool for securing systems, and the other is AI as a vector, and therefore something that needs to be secured. And so from AI as a tool for securing systems, this is a fantastic active red teaming tool. And if you wanted to think of your cyber operations as a red team, blue team, purple team kind of evolution, there's hardly a better pair programmer or man-machine team that's capable of leveraging essentially all of the knowledge about all of the different potential network vulnerabilities and system vulnerabilities, from routing all the way to operating system patches, all the way up to even evaluating complex things like SQL injection attacks, attack surface profiles, and very rapidly and thoroughly documenting the results of all of those explorations. Now, there's a major difference between what cloud providers will enable you to do versus what you can build in your own open source implementations. And I would say that cloud provider cybersecurity as a tool is not going to be as useful as open source cybersecurity as a tool. And the simple reason for that is that the cloud providers are already trying to put guardrails around preventing cloud systems from being used for this purpose. So your mileage may vary, but you won't get much mileage at all out of the cloud providers, in my opinion, for hardcore or for real cybersecurity operations. So looking at what open source systems can be deployed and how those open source systems can be deployed on your own cloud infrastructure or on-premises infrastructure, depending on your requirements, and then understanding what are you really trying to secure. We can't boil the ocean, so don't try to secure all of your security profile at once, but take it in stages. Create a kind of threat assessment, create a attack surface profile assessment at first, identify the most critical potential vulnerabilities, and address them in some kind of prioritization sequence. It's easy to get overwhelmed. You'll probably find hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities in any decently sized infrastructure. That doesn't mean that it's an impossible problem for you to solve. What you have to do is prioritize. You can leverage the intrinsic knowledge that these systems gain by reading when they're being trained on the literature of cyber operations, and help leverage them to help you prioritize the most critical vulnerabilities, also leveraging things like common vulnerabilities and exploits. And the final point I would make here, sorry, Tolgay, I just want to put one last point in here, which is that to try to operate at a higher level of abstraction when thinking about these things, to make it manageable, in the same way that you would have to use chemistry to get manageability around physics for really complex interactions. Think about tools, techniques, and patterns, TTPs. What are common semantic layer operations that lead to security vulnerabilities, and try to secure those processes or that higher abstraction layer, rather than playing whack-a-mole with the thousands of individual technical details. Back to you.
Great, thank you, Robbie. Obviously, we're making improvements and progress and maturing, but going forward, what are the top challenges related to anticipating the next generation of cybersecurity and privacy risks related to AI? Raj.
Yeah, and some of that I already addressed, but I'll speak on that a little bit more. But one comment I also wanted to address with what Ravi said was that it's right that like the commercial implementations of Gen AI, like the Microsofts or the Googles of the world, even OpenAI, they are obviously they are very focused on the business use of how they can enable the business people for business and IT use, right? How can you write a new a new proposal? How can you actually sift through your data and make a new presentation for a customer, for internal leadership and otherwise, right? So there's a massive amount of use there. But if you start going into the innovation space, a lot of these will expose APIs where you could actually have an API level integration with OpenAI directly, or with ChatGPT Enterprise or otherwise, right? Or you can go with open source, like he was talking about Llama and otherwise, right? Where you could actually start using them for unique cases, and many of that for us specifically in how do you use them for defensive and maybe even offensive testing, but mostly defensive detection, remediation, mitigation, otherwise, right? So there is definitely a lot of potential there, and there is a lot of opportunity to but the thing is, Ravi, as you may know, right, that a lot of the times in corporate America or in commercial, a lot of the times we don't have the data scientists or even the capabilities to start using these capability sets, right, that are given to us. So we will rely on vendors to come in and give us the products, the capabilities, or build it for us. Now, some of us obviously will go and invest in data science. We'll bring in the engineers, start building, tweaking with open source llamas of the world and otherwise, right, or API integrations. But like you said, tremendous amount of opportunity in the cybersecurity world to use these. Going back, I'll pivot back to the question asked. So there is definitely a lot of privacy concern with this, right? For example, GDPR violations could occur if data, like it gets, even though there is, let's say, not unauthorized access, but even if data is being shared in a manner where it is not respecting the geographic boundaries that a law states, for example, like GDPR in Europe, or EU, and then UK has its own new law now, and then obviously in the Americas, California has CCPA, CPRA. There are various states that have their own laws. Colorado has their own laws. South Carolina has their own. Massachusetts has their own, right? Virginia has their own. So if you eventually, although none of this at the moment is being actively pursued, but I would not be surprised if eventually this will lead to massive litigation, right? Because eventually, there will be privacy and compliance violations, and then those will be pursued with antitrust or other type of situation that will occur. If I were Microsoft, I'd be thinking about that today, right? So I think so. Those are valid concerns, and forget the GDPRs of the world for a minute. Just look at, in each corporation, if you are running a large or a small or medium-sized corporation, if you're a university, if you are, like a company that has lots of employees, and if your employee data gets access in an unauthorized manner, right? While you yourself are susceptible to, again, you're not maintaining the confidentiality and integrity of your own data. It could be PII data, it could be PCI data, right? So I think that those concerns are going to be there. Like he said earlier, like Ravi said, that like security through obscurity is not going to work anymore, right? So I think that it is high time that we start thinking about these problems now, start thinking about the solutions, making sure that the access to data is fixed. If there's open access, if data is not properly categorized, we should categorize all of our data as sensitive or public or proprietary or confidential, and then take appropriate actions as that data is being accessed in a report or otherwise. You can also tag your data with, like, for example, this data cannot cross this geo boundary. You can have geo boundary tags, right? So I think that the capability sets are already there, right? And now what we have to do is to act upon them so that we don't get into compliance problems with the regulators, who are very powerful, by the way, or just with your own internal security and privacy policies that we all have, right? So I think that those are some of the things that we should proactively start working on now, and not wait for a major non-compliance event to occur. That should not be the precipice. The precipice should be that this eventuality has already happened. It's here, and we should start working on it now.
Great.
Back to you.
Thank you, Raj. Ravi?
I think in many respects, there's going to be a kind of common theme behind what AI. I mean, honestly, I don't really like AI as a buzzword. It's kind of, I'm allergic to it now. But let's just use it. We have the semantic handle we have, but really, let's think of it as essentially learning systems, right? Or systems that are able to collate vast amounts of data. And I think therein lies the real particular risk or challenge, which is that previously things that were very hard to collate and bring together and coordinate are extremely easy now through these kinds of systems to bring to focus. One thing you could think of is artificial intelligence as a focused energy weapon in cyberspace. It brings dozens or hundreds or millions of small data points and small factoids and disparate content to focus on a specific objective task or information need in a way that has just never been possible in human history up until now. And so the full extent of what the implications of that are remain to be seen. But I can tell you that what we're looking at today, as far as, and in the next 6 months, as far as capabilities, are toys compared to what we will be looking at in the next 2 to 5 years. As the principles behind these things become more and more understood, What we have to think of is a slightly different layer. What are the thousands of small disparate facts or small disparate pieces of data that can be aggregated to a particular purpose in a way that I'm not thinking about right now? And so I would just point out that essentially collation and correlation of information that previously was too hard to correlate or collate will now become the primary immediate vector through which AI can be affecting security. Back to you.
Great, Robbie. So I guess what I got is, from my perspective, it's just the vendors, right? Our reliance, for most organizations anyway, the reliance on third parties, that third-party risk assessment, how we do that, that's going to be a challenge too. Okay, great. So, I mean, we talked about these, risk and security challenges, all those things, but we can use it for good use too, right? So what are some ways that AI has the potential to bolster our cyber defense? Raj? Raj, you're muted.
I apologize, I was muted. Definitely, there are lots of opportunities of incorporating generative AI or AI in general in cyber defense use cases, right? There are lots and lots of opportunities, right? And so, like for example, the red teaming, blue teaming exercises, right? Definitely that can be used there. The reality in our world is that the attackers are getting more sophisticated by the day, and they have a lot of resources at their disposal, correct? And sometimes we can't keep hiding at the rate that the attacks are increasing in complexity and speed and volume, right? So having this capability actually is very good for us because we can now basically respond to sophisticated attackers at machine speed. At the rate that these attacks are happening, we are detecting them and either blocking them, mitigating them, remediating them, right? So I think that, as I call it, auto-reactive incident response capabilities are definitely bolstered by having this. For example, capabilities like if you look at Sentinel, and if you look at the capabilities inside Sentinel with what Microsoft has launched with some of the large correlation capabilities and some of the stuff that even Ravi was talking about, right? So definitely, again, a lot of opportunity for improving our incident response, threat detection, because the thing is, gone are the days when we detected threats through static signatures, right? The hashes. So now most of the threat detection happens with behavior analysis of the attacker, of the process, of the pattern, right? All the TTPs that we have and the IOCs. So with this in the mix, definitely our capability becomes much better to detect, respond much faster. So if used properly, uh, and if it is actually something, the thing is, just like Ravi said, we don't want this to become a buzzword. Like if you talk to any vendor now, they say, "Oh yeah, we are powered by AI," right? The ones that like 6 months ago they hadn't heard the term, but now all of a sudden they are powered by AI, right? So, but in reality, wherever it is being properly being used, where we do have deep learning augmented with AI or other, like algorithms that are out there for supervised or really unsupervised machine learning capabilities that can be augmented with artificial intelligence, in this case, like the generative AI buzzword, is definitely opportunities for us to get better in that space. So, I mean, there's a few other advantages we can do, large correlation of our data sets with our data lakes, right? So a lot more potential risk management opportunities, quantifying and understanding the risk, understanding our threat surface better that we did not earlier. So I mean, there's a long laundry list of things we could do, but I think these are some of the low-hanging fruit that we can start using today, right? And definitely, so many of us are already trying to do that. And if you haven't thought about that, then obviously something for all of you to start thinking about is how can you incorporate these in your active cybersecurity operations, incident response, and defense postures today.
Great.
Back to you.
Well, thank you, Raj. Ravi, what are some ways we can use to bolster defense, and maybe some examples too?
Well, absolutely. So I think enumerating the particular or specific areas that are relevant to your particular business as an enterprise, whether you're a government agency or a commercial entity, there are going to be things in your business that present unique potential vectors or threats to you or to the people that you serve. And so prioritize the relevant threats first. And in fact, AI as a tool can be very helpful in that, because it can help you focus in on the particular kinds of vulnerabilities that you may need to address or risk management factors. I think in particular, you could do proactive security auditing. AI enables you to do security auditing at a scale and speed that was prohibitive when it was all manually done. And you can follow that up with a manual assessment and human assessment on detailed potential concern points. And I think in the domain of cloud security in particular, this is actually extremely relevant because cloud security is even more nefariously difficult than on-premises security in many respects, especially with policies and such. So back to you, Tolgay.
Thank you. Thank you for all those insights. So we're going to have some questions, but let me just ask this last question. So given all this, what do you see AI is going? What is next in AI security? Are there technology trends that you see as the game changers? Raj?
I mean, there are some interesting things that are being discussed, right? One thing is, as the attacks and the attackers get more sophisticated, and they may even use generative AI augmented capabilities to launch their attacks. Like I just talked about impersonation, right, with deepfakes. So you counter that with your own, defenses that have been bolstered with generative AI capabilities. Some of the things that we talked about, right? So that's an area. Also on the, on the horizon is bubbling with the collaboration between quantum computing and generative AI capabilities, right? So as you all know that these models require a lot of energy. They require a lot of compute, massive amount of GPUs to actually, if you go look at what GPT 4.5 does, it's mind-boggling, right? So if you introduce quantum into the mix, you get, and if we can somehow have a good implementation of that, which we don't have today, but at least there is research going on, you get the immense computing power of quantum with the capabilities that like these models are bringing, right? So the models can be leaner, meaner, faster, right? With quantum introduction. So definitely there is some interesting research going on in that area. So it'll be very exciting as that thing gets materialized comes on the horizon. And there's a few other interesting things going on. Some of that has already been discussed, but I feel that these are some of the exciting things that are happening in this area.
Great, thank you. Ravi?
I think that we are not yet, well, this is a complicated question because the area is moving so fast. I mean, you don't have to look very far into the future to get quite surprised. And I think one of the things that led to this great explosion or breakaway from, let's call it, traditional machine learning to now this kind of next generation generative artificial intelligence. It was the trick of discovering the mechanism of attention and the mechanism of training on open source text from the internet. Of course, images and other things as well have kind of come along since then, but masked training. So I think the key evolution that's going to lead to a whole quantum leap, no pun intended, in overall AI performance will be overcoming the training data bottleneck. Cybersecurity and cyber operations is a particular area that suffers from not having enough good labeled training data for the purpose of both hardcore network analysis, but also for zero-day exploit detection, and also for general brand protection, information operation protection, and so on and so forth. So there will be ways in which we can create larger labeled data sets to train smarter specialized AIs for specific purposes that will come around in the next couple of years. And those will open entirely new doors that it's really hard to anticipate how they will work, but they will open new doors in both directions. They will open new doors for exploitation as well as new doors for defense. You just have to be current. That's the only real defense against the evolution here.
Great, thank you. Raj, we have a couple of questions for both of you. Raj, you mentioned about that response, the intermediary, right, in terms of the risks associated with ensuring non-sharing of the personal company data, violating those open source rules, etc. So, in an organization, which role has the responsibility to ensure, that non-sharing of personal company data, violating those open source rules, etc. And what are the best practices for implementing that, intermediary model? a role
Right.
accountability perspective?
Right. I mean, this is a loaded question, right? And can go into a lot of detail here. But one thing is that, like if you're using a commercial implementation like Copilot or otherwise, then the CSP or the provider will build that intermediate layer for you. And then you have to verify that it is indeed secure, right? That it meets with your security requirements and the common sense security requirements, right? So you should understand the architecture of where that data is, how it's being encrypted, segmented, and all that stuff, right? How it's being stored, who has access to it, how long will it be there, this, that, and the other. If you are playing with this on your own, if you're going with Llama and otherwise, right, that's where your data science team, your data teams in your organization should be the ones that if you're working, for example, your proprietary Gen AI models, right? And if it's open source, I mean, you can also use OpenAI, by the way, if you want to. So I think that's where, again, the data science teams have to carry that torch to make sure that, whoever is building an intermediate layer is responsible for making sure it's done in construct with common security patterns, right? So their patterns have been published. NIST already has published. If you look at NIST AI RMF, there's good guidelines that are coming out of that. So there is a ton of work going in that space. There's a ton of best practices that have been published. Like, for us, we wrote our own best practices. We wrote the gauge by which we assess these commercial implementations and anything that we may be doing, within, our data science team or our data engineering team. So, but I think that you look over NIST, AI RMF, and they'll give you some good ideas.
Great, thank you. Ravi, maybe you can also touch on this. And Raj, you mentioned about the NIST, but the question is, what frameworks or guidelines do you suggest for evaluating the robustness and security of their AI systems before deployment? I mean, in addition to NIST.
I'm hesitant to. Yeah, I'm absolutely great question, and I'm hesitant to recommend any one-size-fits-all approach because each business has its own particular risk profile. So I think asking the right questions and doing a bit of discovery to try to enumerate the metrics that make sense for your business is totally warranted. We should also not over-rely on these metrics because these metrics are essentially scorecards. They're not true. They're not true assessments of actual vulnerability. And so you have to try to bridge that gap with your own discovery work. So I would say at this moment in time, you need to work with your risk management team to try to assess what is actually a reasonable, and perhaps that's in association with your cybersecurity insurance or something along those lines. What is the appropriate perimeter, and what are the definitions of that?
Great, thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. So last question is, obviously we want to create value, right, using these AI systems. So how can we balance approach, the innovation, driving the innovation and securing? That's the thing. And your last words in terms of AI and usage and going forward. Raj?
I think we should just have a good understanding of our risk and reward. What is your risk tolerance levels and what is the reward you're expecting, right? What business you are in, what kind of data do you have? What could be the losses that may occur, loss scenarios if your data was exposed, compliance risk and otherwise, but also what value you can bring to the business. What productivity improvements and enhancements could you have with these capabilities, right? So that risk and reward, you have to have a good handle of. And with that, you take the appropriate risk and you get the appropriate reward.
Great. Thank you. Ravi?
I would say that there's no doubt that the capabilities that AI brings to the table are going to be completely transformative. The only place where there's any, and there will be no stone left unturned. The only question is when and in what particular order. Very much like the internet swept through our entire way of life. This will have a similar impact because who doesn't want to have the ability to scale complex pain points or scale complex opportunities? Everyone wants that. So, but maybe the best general piece of advice here is take it one step at a time. Identify the core business processes that already are generating value. What are the game loops, if you will, that are actually valuable? And then how can you make those stronger, better, faster, shorter time to result, more robust, more resilient in some way? And then incrementally get into this. Don't turn it into a silo. Don't turn it into throw everything in the kitchen sink in it at once. Take measured steps.
Great. Well, I really thank you for your participation in this great topic, and we really value your insights. I think AI has all that potential, right, in terms of us creating value. Every organization, since it's out there now, no returning back, and we have to do something about it. And what that is, it depends on the organization, the context. Every organization is different. So answering the what, why, how questions, I think, going forward is really the key. So very appreciative. Thank you for joining. Nick, back to you.
Great. And thank you all for such an insightful panel discussion. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. As a reminder, please be sure to check out the prizes and raffle rules section to see how you can earn points for the chance to win one of several prizes. Our next session will begin at 12:25 p.m. Eastern Time, which will be a fireside chat titled Level Up Workplace Productivity in the Age of Information Overload. Please click on the join button that will appear on your screen to be redirected to the next session, and we look forward to seeing you there.